Welcome to the Open Apple podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a long-time user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Hello and welcome to Open Apple. This is show number 50 for August 2015. I'm your co-host number 1, Quinn Dunkey, and with me as always is co-host number 2, Mike McGinnis. How you doing, Mike?
Woo! I'm here! Yay!
So this should be a really big deal because, you know, big round number, and everybody likes big round numbers. It's show number 50.
Well, technically it's not 50 because we did a bunch of special episodes, and I think even you and I have done a couple of like .5 shows. So I think there's like 58 or 59 pieces of media associated with Open Apple that you can watch. But yay for number 50 anyway, right?
Yeah. I think we talked about doing something special for episode 50 and then didn't. So here we go.
Awesome. Well, hey, look, this is, I think, is your 1 year of being co-host on the show. How's that?
It is, yeah, because it was at KansasFest last year that I got browbeaten
Blackmailed.
into being as co-host on this show to replace the illustrious Mr. Gagney. He's a tough act to follow. So this is, my 1 year anniversary on Open Apple. So woohoo!
Great. Woohoo.
And as I guess in celebration of that fact, I've been getting also peer pressured into joining Twitter. So I have recently done that for, I guess apparently by popular demand. I don't know. But so anyone who wants to follow me on Twitter, you can follow me at Quinn Dunkey, and I'll have that link in the show notes, of course. It's going to be just mostly updates about the show here and about my blog and possibly, making fun of Commodores and whatever else is on my mind. So,
of course.
Won't be very exciting, I'm sure, but there you go.
All right. Well, at least one of us got to attend KansasFest this year. Sadly, it was not me, but Quinn, you went there, you had a great time, and you brought back a guest.
I did indeed. The illustrious keynote speaker, a legend in the industry, Becky Heineman, who is with us on the show this month. Thanks for joining us, Becky. How you doing?
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Excellent. Well, since we're on the subject of KansasFest, why don't we dive right in with that? How was your visit this year after having not been for so many years?
It was actually a little bit of new and a little bit of, okay, where have I been all these years? It's back to the fact that the last time I was at KansasFest was when they were still holding it at Avila College, which now I've come to find that was like 10 years ago. So it's like, okay, I've been away for a while. But I used to
Where
be
does
regular.
the time go?
Yeah, where's the time go? Because I was a regular from the day it was conceived till around the early 2000s, which was when KansasFest kind of just dried up. And at the same time, I really got busy doing console video game development. So I kind of just stopped going, and then I kind of just drifted away.
What brought you back this year? And not only that, but motivated a whole lot of Apple II-ish type output from you recently.
Well, it's like a perfect storm almost. It all really started about 6 months ago when a friend of mine, Eric Shepard, was talking about going back to KansasFest, and then he said he couldn't make it for health reasons. And my first reaction to him was that they're still doing that? And he then gave me the website and so forth, which I went and checked it out. And at that point, I then went ahead and more out of just a curious than anything else, I sent an email off to their info. It was like info@kansasfest.org saying, hey, how's you going? And if you ever guys want me to just talk there, I'll be more than happy to help out. And that's really about all I said. And I didn't even expect them to answer. And then it was like, a couple weeks later, I got a reply back from him saying, like, are you really Rebecca Heineman? And after 2 emails convincing him, yes, I am Rebecca Heineman. Why is there a problem here? And then it was the incredulity that I actually was willing to talk, let alone acknowledge their existence. Well, it was only a few more emails after that. They booked me as the keynote speaker, and the rest is history.
What was your reaction to it? I mean, as far as seeing it again after so many years, had it changed? Was it still, were a lot of the same people there? What was your sort of first impression?
Well, my first impression was at first it was it was a new college, new people, new everything. So I really was a little uncomfortable at the very beginning, because there was almost nothing of the original KansasFest that I remembered being there, such as like different locations. So the whole map of the locations was different. The people, none of them I knew. The only people that I knew from KansasFest, unfortunately, a majority of them had already passed away, like Joe Cohn and Ryan Zinica and Tony Gonzalez. They were all very close friends of mine, and each one of them, I attended the funerals on two of them. So of course, like, that was kind of depressing. And then the other two people attendees would have been Eric Shepard and Tony Diaz, which I understand are still regulars, but for whatever reason they decided not to attend this year. So there were no familiar faces for me. But once I sat down, got to the door rooms, and started walking up and down the halls, that's when the familiarity started setting in. It's like, oh, I remember back at Avila when everybody had a door open. You go in there and you see people, all their equipment and the soldering irons and the circuit boards and stuff. And it's like, okay, now this is the KansasFest I remember. And with that, within like an hour or two, I was essentially home again. And it was also part of it was like, I brought with me my 2GS, which I hadn't even powered up in 15 years. So I was actually half expecting it to spark and spritz, etc., when I plugged it in, but instead it powers up and boots. And I'm like,
Wow.
whoa. But granted, it's I was actually, in that case, it was like almost a 30-year-old drive mechanism. I was completely shocked the thing still ran. So with the help of some other KansasFest attendees, I was able to get a compact flash hard drive and copy everything from my existing drive onto the new drive. And with that, another attendee said, hey, I have an inner drive with a bad power supply. And I said, I have an inner drive with a bad hard drive. I think we could make beautiful music together here. And a little bit of soldering here and there, out came a working inner drive. And for me, it's like, well, I got a compact flash drive. Why would I need an inner drive now? Here, you can have my my mechanism. Have fun. Oh, by the way, here's the source code, the actual ROM, because I was the one who wrote it. So
That's awesome. Well, if you're going to have hardware that needs help or doesn't work, that's definitely the place to bring it.
yes, and it was very nice. It was also kind of a little surprising and a little bit humbling that the very fact that when I was expressing any sort of interest in bringing back some of my old games and so forth, and it says, yeah, it would be nice, but I don't have a monitor. Within minutes, I had like 3 people offering me monitors. And it's just like, well, I don't have a working mouse. Here's a working mouse. Here's a working keyboard. Here's a working this. It's like, well, but so when I flew back, I had pretty much everything I needed to get my 2GS running, where I first entered with just a bare bones GS. No monitor, no keyboard, no mouse, no nothing. When I came home, I had a complete system.
Yeah, KansasFest is funny that way. Everybody goes home with armloads of hardware. Just the generosity of everyone is quite amazing.
That's true.
So did you stay for the entire week, or did a lot of the keynote speakers either fly in just for the day or maybe hang out for an extra day?
I stayed in until Saturday. If I recall, KansasFest actually concludes the end of Sunday. But
yeah, Sunday morning, I think,
yeah,
is when people start moving out.
Exactly. I left on like the afternoon of Saturday. Also, I took Friday off because we had family in the area. So I was there for I arrived Tuesday, did the keynote on Wednesday, spent all day Thursday just hanging out with the KansasFest. Friday, in the middle of the day, my wife and I went to other parts of Kansas to visit family and sightsee. But then Friday night, spent it in the company of KansasFest attendees. And of course, Saturday morning, KansasFest again, and then back home.
So you got the chance to see some of the other presentations and sessions and things like that. Did you have any particular favorites or any moments that really stand out to you as kind of wow or really great memories?
Well, some of them, I like the technical talks. I mean, Quinn herself, she did a talk about her APIs I enjoyed, plus all her adventures with the mouse. What's hilarious is that she was having this issue with an Apple IIc mouse. And I was like, oh, yeah, I remember solving that back in 1985 or 86. This is what you got to do to fix it. It's like, that can't be right. So trust me, just do it.
Yeah, I should tell that story. So for anyone who wasn't there, doesn't know, I had built a mouse driver for the 2E Enhanced and 2C and 2C Plus, and I did a talk about it at the show, and it had sort of one lingering bug in it, which was that on the 2C, the interrupts are such that you don't get notified when the mouse button goes up, only when it goes down. And so it's very difficult to make double clicking work. You can only detect new button down events after the mouse has moved. And so I had been really struggling with that, and I did my talk with that bug still in the code, and I had mentioned that. And so yeah, afterwards, Becky came up to me, and she's like, "Oh, well, here's how you fix that. You got to use vertical blank interrupt as kind of like a watchdog timer, and watch the state of the mouse button." And so yeah, I started thinking along those lines, and sure enough, it was actually pretty easy to do once I knew kind of what direction to go in, and got it working by the time of my following session, which also had a mouse component to it. So it was amazing. It was KansasFest at its best, honestly. Collaboration, people that know stuff, people that want to know stuff, hacking and helping each other out. It was fantastic.
After we had that meeting, after I got home, I pulled up my source code to Borrowed Time. It's an Apple II game I did, which was one of my first games with the mouse interface. And I pulled up the source code, and yeah, I found my mouse driver, and there was some colorful words in there about how I felt with the mouse driver. So it's like watchdog typer, if Apple IIc, and then there was some colorful language, and then it activated a vertical blank interrupt.
Yep, I think I wrote that same code late at night at KansasFest.
So speaking of source code, in addition to showing up at KansasFest and wowing everybody, you've also been digging through some of your old archives and releasing some stuff that was once thought perhaps long lost. Can you talk about that?
Well, I'm meticulous, very meticulous in storing and archiving source code. I've been doing this in my entire career. So like pretty much every game I've worked on in some fashion or another, I have a complete archive of everything I worked on. Because I know how valuable this code is, in the sense that A, either from a learning experience, or B, in some cases, nowadays there's been a resurgence of retro gaming, and a lot of my competitors, what they do is they just simply get a copy of the original binaries and run DOSBox on or some sort of emulator, where I'm saying, well, why would you want to run an emulator when I could just pull up the source code and either do a translator on it, or in my case with Bard's Tale right now, I'm actually reporting it to Windows because I have the source, so I have all the math and all of the tables. It was kind of trivial for me to get a native version of the game running modern. Well, as I was going through my archives, I have complete disk images of my Apple IIgs. And they're sitting on my hard drive. And so like when I was backing up the hard drive that was at KansasFest, after I'd gone through the hard drive, I realized, nope, there's absolutely nothing on the hard drive that I didn't already have backups of. So it was like, good, if there was something hidden there, nope. But I have been going through just recently a bunch of floppy disks, and I did find some source code that I'd never had backups of, but I was able to recover. An example just recently I announced was Taxman, which is the original Apple II game written by Brian Fitzgerald for HAL Labs. But then again, I've also found my source code to like the unfinished game of SimCity, the Ultima, Bard's Tale, Wasteland, all these other games. Some of them are finished, some of them are not. And then, of course, with the help of Oliver Gogel over at Brutal Deluxe, he was able to give me a copy of the source code to an assembler he wrote, which allowed me to recompile his code and get it running. And my first victim to this was this code to a game I did called Space Ace. And I talked with Digital Leisure, and they said they actually don't have a claim to that source because it was done by a company called ReadySoft, who has disappeared. So since they said, well, we don't have to worry about the quality of the graphics of that game, because if anybody ships a version of Space Ace stealing that graphics, you might sell a copy, maybe two. And since the source code, they had no ownership claim to it at all, they said, fine, you want to release a source? We don't care. So I did. And then, of course, I've been asking permission for people who have other copyrights, such as like Brian Fitzgerald just recently sent me an email blessing my endeavor to release the source code to Taxman. So by the time that this podcast airs, it should be up on GitHub.
Wow, great.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Yeah, we'll link to that. Yeah, Taxman, for anyone who doesn't know, of course, was an excellent Pac-Man clone for the Apple II, and it would be a great lesson in high-res graphics programming for anyone who wants to learn more about that. I think you posted on Facebook recently, Becky, that you also found the source code for Neuromancer. Is that right?
Yes, I found a source code to Neuromancer. I found the source code to all the VTest stuff, Harmony, Salvation, my printer drivers, the Quickie hand scanner. Also, I've got the ROMs. Yeah, I've also got the ROMs for InnerDrive and all the native drivers for that, Focus Drive and InnerDrive.
Yeah, Neuromancer is one of my favorite games, actually, so I would love to see the source code for that.
Well, I was the one who wrote that, so...
That's why you're one of my favorite authors.
Oh, well, thank you.
It's amazing. We're sitting here talking, and you're listing off these titles, and I'm, having these flashes of memories in my head of what wonderful games they were and these great times that I had playing them. And sometimes I forget that, oh yeah, Burger Becky did that, and she did this too, and all this awesome stuff. So it's really great to hear you putting this stuff out there again and being involved with the community.
Although I will have to say right now, I've already approached EA Legal, and they gave me a big fat no when it came to SimCity. So they shot it. Yep. And another games that I'm pretty certain I'm going to get a big fat no on is Crystal Quest, because they're actually developing a remade version of Crystal Quest. So they really don't want the source code to a game that they're currently getting ready to market again out there.
So you have the sort of unique distinction of having written the first and last 2GS game ever. So you sort of saw the entire run of the knowledge of how to program this machine evolve over time. We recently had an interview with John Brooks of Rastan fame, and I wonder, did you see these sort of more advanced techniques kind of come into the community as the 2GS kind of went through its lifespan?
Oh, well, hell, I kind of invented half of them, such as like N key rollover on the keyboard. I was the one who came up with that. I did that for Out of This World and Wolfenstein 3D. It's where I actually came up with a technique where I uploaded code into the ADB controller, so I can actually get ADB events raw from the mouse and keyboard, so I can detect more than one key being played. Being pressed at the same time, because I wanted to simulate a joypad, and you couldn't really do it with just reading the keyboard events. So I figured that one out. Then there was a PEA instruction trick where you shadowed the video memory, so you actually could move it up to bank 0 for the super high res, and then using PEA, you can actually copy one buffer to another with only 6 cycles per word. And then I had also figured out a timing where you could only do 13 in a row, then you had to insert a no-op, because it actually, there was a difference in timing between the 1 megahertz bus and the 2.6 megahertz bus, and that actually got you back in sync. And then there was a trick I used, this is back before the 2GS, where I actually could read an entire disk track in one revolution. So that made it so that I actually tricked it, which I read all the nibbles in one track. Then I told the motor to move head. While it was moving the head, that's when I decoded the nibbles. And then I went back so that it, as physically as fast as it could, to read the track, one revolution, move the head, and I was then it read the whole disk. And that's how I loaded Mind Shadow, Tracer Sanction, Borrowed Time. That's how they booted.
That's really remarkable. So have you sort of found any kind of new tricks now that you're going back and looking at some of the source code and porting it to modern machines again? Is there stuff you'd forgotten about?
Yeah, some things I kind of forgot was uploading stuff into the ADB bus. I remember having to learn ADB protocol, but I completely forgot why I learned ADB protocol. So it's like, yeah, I remember that you had to pull the line, and then there's there was a cell time, and it was 30% high, 60% low was a 0-bit, and 66% high, 33% low was a 1-bit. And I'm like, but why do I know this? And then when I looked at my code for Out of This World, like, oh yeah, that's why I had to learn that.
That's fantastic. So, well, let's talk about some of your more modern stuff now. So you're working on this Bard's Tale project. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How did that get started, and where is that at now?
Well, it got started by the fact that a company called In Exile acquired the rights to Bard's Tale. And they went ahead and announced a few months back that they're going to do a Kickstarter for Bard's Tale 4. And of course, I was immediately approached by all the fans asking, so am I involved? And I had to tell them no, because that's the first news I've heard of it too. Well, they started their Kickstarter. And again, I get even more people asking me, are you involved? And I said, well, fine. So I went in and privately contacted In Exile and said, so you do know I'm the creator of Bard's 3, but they said they had everything covered. But on the Kickstarter page, people were asking, hey, are you going to re-release the original trilogy? And then that's when I brought up the fact that I still have the source to the original trilogy, and I still have everything for it. Well, one thing led to another, and I entered into an agreement where I'm doing a remastering of the original trilogy based on the original source code. And I've got it up and running now. I've been playing the game, and I hope to have in fact, almost certainly by the end of this month, August, I should have prototypes already out in people's hands so they'll be able to play the game and playtest it from beginning to end. But it's running natively on the Mac and PC, and it's all rewritten in C++, but the C++ was, in many cases, just translated from a 65x16 assembly. Of course, I recoded it so it becomes more of a C program, and it's not literally 65x16 assembly. But I wrote the code, so I know what the algorithms did. So I said, oh, I know what this function does. This is what it looks like in C. I know what this function does. This is what it does in C. So I've been, I'm now once again back to mastering my 65x16 assembly. It didn't take me long to get back into a groove.
It's like riding a bike. Never forget how.
Pretty much. It was like riding a bike.
Are you using the same art assets and music and things like that, or is that being redone as well?
Right now, it's all the same art assets and the music. The contract is such that I don't have any budget to hire an artist to redo that. Now, granted that if the game does really well, and so forth, or there's a fan requirement, saying, hey, if you gave me a redrawn background, well, I'll just swap it in. It's not that hard. It's not like back in the 2GS where when I was creating art for it, in addition to having to fit it in memory, I also had to deal with limited palettes. Like in Bard's Tale, the background image had to be drawn only in 4 colors: black, white, light gray, dark gray, because I had to reserve other ranges of color in the palette to put for the art. Another piece of the palette had to go for the spell icons. I mean, you really had to plan out where everything goes. Whereas now in the remake, it's like, palette schmallet, just put it anywhere. So it makes it a lot easier.
So honestly, I think that's great because I want to play the remakes with the 2GS graphics. I think that's more fun, honestly, than doing something more modern.
Mm-hmm.
Neuromancer is Quinn's favorite Apple II game, but Wasteland is my favorite Apple II game, and I know you worked extensensively on that. Were you involved at all with the Wasteland 2?
Nope, not involved at all with Wasteland 2. It's one of the things where that if things work out well, who knows? I may do a remastering of Wasteland 2. Now, granted, NXL did do a remastering of the original Wasteland 1, but they did it in a really strange way where they took the original game binaries, ran it with DOSBox, and then they kind of patched it on the fly. Okay. Whereas for me, I just take the source code and just make a really native modern version. One that doesn't require you to have backups of your character discs.
Speaking of which, did you find any of your old characters when you were digging up the Bard's Tale source?
No, I didn't find all my characters. I mean, my characters have since moved on. I imported them to other games. I put them all into Dragon Wars, and then I played Dragon Wars. And since then,
cool.
Went on to other games and so forth. I don't know where I even have my old character discs from Dragon Wars, but the thing is that Dragon Wars also is one of those games that's on the list of games I'll be remastering.
Excellent. Yeah, I would love to see that as well.
Mm-hmm. At least the thing with Dragon Wars is the source code to that is like I just have to say, who do I need to talk to get permission for releasing the source code? Hey, Becky, can I get permission to release the source code to Dragon Wars? I don't know. What's in it for me? It does help that I don't have anybody I need to fight with on that one.
Now you've obviously been hard at work updating a lot of these older games. Are we going to see any new, call it pure 8-bit or 16-bit Apple II games or products coming from you anytime soon?
That really depends on whether or not I actually have free time. See, the thing is that most of these remakes and stuff I'm doing right now that are on modern systems, I actually have I stand to make at least a little bit of money, like rent. I know doing anything on the classic games is ones where that if I get $5, I'll be lucky. But it's more for a labor of love. I mean, it's one of those things where you never say never, but it's more like, for me, I think what'll happen is that when it comes time for me to say retire, and I'm in a position where I don't need to work for a living, then I could devote my time to doing stuff like, hey, maybe I should fix stuff on the Apple II, or hell, I might. And one of my on my to-do list is write Cookie Clicker for the Apple II. It's like, there's no reason why that game can't be on an Apple II in its glory.
Right.
That's right. Yeah, Dagan Brock said the same thing about Flappy Bird, and he made an awesome double low-res version of it.
Yep. Well, what's funny is Dragon Wars was double low res. I'm sorry, double high res. So you take it back as double high res, which was one of the things I took a risk on when I did that back in the day was. Everybody was still saying do standard high res, and so it's like Apple IIs really aren't that popular anymore, and Apple IIs and 2Cs and 2GSs all run the game. So give me the art in double high res, and it sold really well. I mean, the Trailblazer really was a game called Earhart, because that was the one I remember from Rotorbund. It was the first game that required double high res to run, and that got me.
That was a
saying,
beautiful
well,
game.
Yep. I said, if that could sell on the Apple II in decent numbers, then sure enough, I'm going to give you an RPG in it.
Yeah, I think we all remember Dragon Wars as probably being the best looking RPG, honestly, on the 8-bits. And it was so great to see because double high res I think was really underused, probably just because of the difficulty of programming it. So anytime we got to see it, it was an easy sale for me.
Yeah, trust me, that there's challenging. I mean, the very fact that on the Apple II you had 7-bit bytes for graphics. I mean, come on, Woz. Yeah, I know it's saved one chip, but you just made lives of millions of programmers more difficult.
That's for sure. He's the source of a lot of gray hairs, I think, among the programmers of his hardware.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the very fact that there's no interrupts at all in the baseline machine just made lots of happiness, joy right there. And I'm being sarcastic.
Awesome. Mike, any other questions for Berg and Becky?
Yeah, at one point you were part of the group of people that looked at what turned out to be the non-happening of AppleWorks GS 2.0.
Uh-huh. Well, there really isn't much to say. There was I forgot who it was that actually got the copy of the source code to ClarisWorks or AppleWorks for the 2GS, and I got a copy of the source code, and I still have it in my archives. I actually found it, but the trouble is that nobody then contacted me anymore. I then said, and I even sent email messages and stuff saying, "Hey, are we doing this or not?" And I got crickets. And so at that point, I then said, well, if nobody's going to be heading this project or figure out what we're going to do, well, then I'll just put the source code away. One thing I do remember quite clearly was that in order to build AppleWorks, you had to do it on the Mac using these modified version of APW and their tools, only because the source code was so huge, and it took something like about half an hour to build. And one of the biggest problems is that when they wrote AppleWorks, they used a strange macro language. So it kind of looked like Pascal when you looked at the source, but it really boils down to assembly language. And of course, my thought was like, why did they do this? And the macros are so complicated that it kind of reminds me these days of template programming on C++, where you...
Oh, yes.
Yeah, while it may make the code easier to write somewhat, it makes the compiler do so much work that your compile times are so long. That's one reason why I see programmers bitch about, oh, it takes me an hour and a half to compile my code, whereas I don't use any of that shit. And like Space Ace, by the time I hit return, everything is built, including the data of the game. And I'm like, that's the way it should be done. Heck, Bard's Tale right now for the PC, the source code of it builds at about, I'd say, 1 second. And that's all the source code, all the C++. I say, clean, hit build, done. And it's like, well, don't bog down the compiler. Well, AppWorks was like that. They had all these templates and macros and things, and the very fact that it took easily half an hour to a full hour, depending on how fast your Mac ran, to build this, that would explain to me, it's like, no wonder why no one wants to touch this program or make modifications to it. It's just so convoluted and huge. But other than that, I really hadn't heard anything more as to whatever happened. I mean, maybe you can enlighten me. Did they lose the rights to it, or did Claris have cold feet, or what?
I heard pretty much what you told me, but from some people, I guess, who are more bitter about it. Just that AppleWorks GS was a huge mess and not worth, it would make more sense to simply start over from scratch to write 2.0. And at that point, 2GS development was no longer a thing that made money. And so nobody went down that road.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense because, I mean, back at the time, because for one, if it made money, then Claris would have, actually funded the development of AppleWorks 2.0 or something like that. But back then, it was like, it was more of a hobby, and they might have sold, I don't know, maybe 1,000 copies, which still is respectable. But, when you think about it, if you sell 1,000 copies at $100 a piece, that's $100,000, but that only funds like a couple of programmers for a year. And that's, of course, assuming that these people are, doing this more of a labor of love than actual living on that. Because there's no money for marketing and sales and stuff like that. It's just pure dev. And at the same time, is that everybody had to spend a lot of money on buying the highest end Mac you could possibly purchase, in order to tolerate those build times. Now, of course, granted, if I pulled up the source code to ClarisWorks or AppleWorks, I probably could get it to build on a modern machine in about, 2 or 3 minutes. But still, that would have to take time to create an assembler that mimicked the APW assembler that they used. And that in and of itself is a project.
What might have been. So I'm sure you get asked this a lot, and maybe this is an easy question, maybe not. But looking back over the years, I see that you've worked on like 250 games or something like that, which is like,
easily.
wow. Wow. I mean, it blows my mind. Are there do you have like a favorite memory or a favorite project that you worked on?
I think one of my most favorite projects really was Out of This World. Because the very concept of Out of This World was more of a dare. When Interplay was first shown, Out of This World by Eric Chahi, the game was written hand-tuned to the Amiga. And he wrote the game in 68,000 assembly, using an interpreted language that he wrote the compiler in Amiga Basic. So it generated, it's all Amiga-centric, but the real thing about it was he used the Amiga hardware to its fullest. So we got the game, we started distributing it for the Amiga, we ported it to the PC, and then ported it to Atari ST. And the game was selling well, but I look at the game graphics and I says, you know what, I think I could do that on my 2GS. And Brian Fargo was saying, no, it's impossible. You cannot do that game on the 2GS and definitely not on the Super Nintendo. And I said, okay. So I went over, grabbed a copy of the source, locked myself in my office for about 2 weeks, and then I came up with a proof of concept that ran. I literally just worked day and night, converting the 68,000 into hand-tuned 65.816 assembly. And in a couple of weeks, I had a prototype. The game only ran about 5 frames per second. It was really slow, but it ran. And it was on my 2GS. And I brought Fargo in, and he brought a bunch of other people in, and they were just looking at this just slack-jawed, going like, you got this running on the 2GS? It's like, yep, here it is. You can play it. And they said, okay, let's do a Super Nintendo version. So I then spent another month or two optimizing the game engine on the Apple 2GS. So I got the frame rate up to around 15 frames per second on a 2GS. And then with that, I then redid the graphic routines for the Super Nintendo. And I pulled out a lot of tricks, which is in and of itself could be the topic of a talk here. But I did so many little graphic tricks and optimization tricks in 65/816 in order to get that game to run at, I think our target rate was 20 frames per second. And that was with no hardware assist, no extra thing on the cartridge. It was a slow ROM, everything, but I still got it to run. And with that, people were like, holy crap, out of this world on a Super Nintendo. And built the game all on my Apple 2GS, gave them the ROM images, and they sent it off to Nintendo, who in turn said, like, holy crap, what Super Effects chip do you need? It's like, none. And there's still people to this day that they say, oh yeah, I played, Out of This World, one of those Super Effects chip games. And it's like, there was no Super Effects chip in that game. And they still look at me funny, like, that's impossible. You couldn't do polygons on a Super Nintendo. It says, just look at the code of Out of This World. Yes, you can.
That's amazing. I actually didn't realize it wasn't a Super FX game either. But you just
nope,
said
it's
that.
all software. There's no Super FX chip in there at all.
For any of our listeners who may not know, the Super FX chip was a floating point accelerator that was driving a lot of the 3D games on the Super Nintendo, like most famously Star Fox and some of those. You could always tell those carts because they had a couple extra pins on the connector. So that's a good way to see which games were using it. So that's amazing that you did it without that.
Yep. And then what's funny was that because I did a Super Nintendo version, I then actually finished the 2GS version. I went in and finished it, bit credits, put everything in there, says here it is, the 2GS version of the game. Well, Interplay wasn't interested in releasing the game because at that time the 2GS market was pretty much dead. Well, there was a company called the Big Red Computer Club that was buying up the rights to Apple 2GS games and redistributing them. So I then said, hey, do you want to ship, Big Red Computer Club, do you want to sell Out of This World? And they're going like, yeah. I made the introductions. They called up and Interplay saying, well, we really can't sell you the rights to the game because the way the contract is, but we could press the game. But however, though, we have to do a minimum pressing. And Fargo was more like saying, like, screw you guys. Here, you got a minimum order of 1,000 copies, and we charge $25 wholesale for a copy. And Big Red Computer Club said, okay, here's a check for $25,000. And Brian was like, whoa, okay, fine. We'll press 1,000 copies. So we did. We pressed 1,000 copies using Interplay packaging and everything, mailed them off to Big Red Computer Club, and Brian was thinking, like, hey, that's the easiest 25,000 I've ever made. So much suckers. And a few months later, they reordered.
Wow.
And Fargo actually came up to me and says, like, I just got a reorder for Out of This World. I never thought they were going to sell 10 copies, let alone 1,000. And sure enough, we sent another 1,000 copies off to Big Red Computer Club, which I understand they eventually did sell it out as well. But they didn't do another reorder because that's when they realized sales are such that it wasn't worth it for another reorder. But 2,000 people eventually purchased a copy of Out of This World for their 2GS, which made me the last 2GS commercial game out there.
You're well known for putting Easter eggs in your games.
Oh, yeah.
Do you still get people coming up to you and say, hey, I found this in this game, or think that they found some mistake?
Not recently, but there are people who've been asking me saying, like, so what's this picture of you getting your head chopped off? I found it when I was going through the data files or something. Said, yeah, it's an Easter egg.
Are there any out there that, to your knowledge, haven't been discovered yet?
Oh, no, because after the game's been out for a year, I just leak it. I just say, here it is. Like a good example is in Bard's Tale. If you go to the Temple of the Mad God, and it says, like, what is the name of the Mad God? And you're supposed to say Tarjan. But if you say burger, the temple priest would go like, you have uttered the most unspeakable word, prepare to die. And then this massive combat comes out. And of course, the intent was to murder you mercilessly. But if you manage to have a party strong enough to survive, the temple priest says, like, oh, let's try that again. And they give you an even worse set of monsters to come after you. And if you manage to survive that, they say, okay, well, fine. Just don't say that again.
That's fantastic.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Becky, for taking some time and chatting with us. It's been a lot of fun.
Hey, it's been wonderful. And thank you for having me on your show.
This is Mark Simonson, and you're listening to the Open Apple Podcast.
All right. Well, again, that was a great interview with Burger Becky, who had as we understand it, had a great time at KansasFest. I wasn't there to see it, but it looks like from everything she said and from what she posted online, it was she had a lot of fun, and everybody had a lot of fun meeting her, and she's been really productive with Apple II stuff lately, and that's just been awesome to see. But we do have some news that we should talk about, don't we, Quinn?
We sure do. Why don't we roll on into that?
It may be old, but there's still news. Apple II news.
All right, I think this first item is mine. It's, I guess, the obligatory entry in this month's Halt and Catch Fire segment. I'm always looking for Apple IIs, as I'm sure most of our listeners are in that show. And finally spotted one, although it was very brief and fleeting, which I guess are two words that mean the same thing. So there was an Apple II under a dust cover in the background of one of those scenes. There's this scene where Gordon is sneaking around an associate's garage, and he peeks in through the window of the garage, and there is very distinctively an Apple II under a dust cover on a pile of stuff on a table in this garage. You can just sort of barely make out the corner of it, but it's very definitely an Apple II keyboard. It's 35 minutes in, I believe, in the final episode of this season, or the second final, one of those last two episodes. Unfortunately, he then in the next scene goes into that garage and takes the cover off, and whatever Apple II it was is gone. So I'm not sure how that Apple II managed to sneak in there. Maybe there's a funny story there, like the set dressers put it in there because they had it in their stock of old computers, and then someone was like, oh gosh, there's an Apple logo on this, we don't want to get sued, or I don't know. But yeah, it's definitely there, and then it's gone just like that. I believe it was an Apple II Plus because it was definitely not, it's definitely an older style keyboard, but it didn't have the raised power light or anything like that, so I would say it was probably an Apple II Plus. But there you go. There's your frame-by-frame dissection of Halt and Catch Fire for this month.
Yeah, and the season is over, and I think you can watch the whole thing online right now at amc.com, and then I think it's only up there for a week or two, or maybe a month, and then it'll go away, and it'll come back right before next season when they'll do the marathon, just to try and get more viewers and remind you what you missed. So yeah, and I'm just going to say boo Atari, because it's all Commodores that they use, but I think it's appropriate to say boo Atari anyway.
Fair enough. Yep, and boo Commodore.
That's right. Our friend Plamen has been very busy lately. He has been selling. He's been cloning stuff and like crazy, and selling it on eBay. This first item, and we mentioned it in the news section instead of in the eBay one, because we don't talk about eBay, and two, because we like Plamen, and so we're going to talk about it here. He's selling it's the Applied Engineering D-Clock module for the Apple IIc. It's a clone. There's a buy it now for $66, and it looks like the shipping is, at least to me, is free from Hungary, so that's pretty awesome.
It is indeed. Bulgaria, I think, actually, isn't it?
Oh, yep, you're right. Boy. Ignorant American here, folks. Anyway, if you don't know what the D-Clock is, it is a clock option for the RAM Express and the Apple IIc's memory expansion card or compatibles. The D-Clock enables you to, you can support applications that use the ProDOS time clock function. You can add the current time and date to your ProDOS files, and you can play, and then any application like AppleWorks, or I think maybe even the older Apple Writer, will pull a clock if it knows it's there for the date and time and display it on screen as you're working. And you can set your current date and time in Apple, like for AppleWorks database categories and things like that, with a single keystroke. He's also sending along a copy of the user manual, but you'll have to buy your own watch battery for it.
Very cool. Yeah, his products are he's just making all of us hardware tinkerers look bad. He's cranking them out at this furious rate, and they all look fantastic. He does these white PCBs that are really distinctive and really nice. The designs, yeah, they all look great, and they're all available. We've got lots of folks, myself included, who are always developing things and talking about maybe having them ready someday. But yeah, good old Plamen, he puts his PCBs where his mouth is. So good on you. He will be getting more of my money shortly.
Yeah, and I guess we should just go ahead and talk about his next item. This is the RamWorks 3 clone. He announced on Facebook in the Apple II enthusiast group back on the 29th of July that he now has the RamWorks 3 RAM card clone ready for purchase, or he's close, and it's going to have the VGA extension, which is really cool. Because again, we're trying to get away from some of these older weirdo, funky signal Apple-made monitors and things like that. And just having RGB, I think, on your Apple II is kind of cool. I don't know that you get that much from it for an 8-bit. So the Apple III was built with a digital XRGB output, and so some of the what little software there was written to specifically look really great on an RGB screen. So I don't know if you're buying a whole lot with this RGB card. Do you know anything about that?
You just had to sneak the Apple III in there, didn't you? Oh, the Apple III. Oh, the software.
Fancy schmancy. I have all 6 Apple-made software packages. Thank you.
They're all lined up in a row. It's a very short row.
They fit on half a bookshelf.
That's right. Small bookshelf. So I don't actually know a lot about this VGA add-on for that he's also got. I'm really interested in it. I assume the reason it's an add-on for the RamWorks card, it sounds like a bit of an odd thing. I assume the reason for that is, well, A, so it doesn't take up a slot, and B, because obviously a RAM card has access to the address and data buses. And my understanding is that the way these devices work is they just scan the video portions of the Apple II memory space and just display whatever's there. So I'm assuming his VGA does that, so it would just function as a standard video output, so you wouldn't need special software or anything to take advantage of it, like you would on some other types of devices, like the Second Sight, which has some advanced modes that require special software. So that, yeah, I'm not for sure about that because I haven't actually used one, but that's my understanding of it.
Well, Applied Engineering on the RamWorks 3, I think towards the end of the run maybe, actually did make, it was like a 2 or 3 meg expansion board that could also do VGA output. And so I assume this is a clone of that. And I know that the guys over at Ultimate Micro, is that what they're called? Did I get that right? Yes. They're also working on a clone of this. First, 3 meg is great in a 2E if you're doing spreadsheets or databases on AppleWorks, things like that. The original cards don't show up very much on eBay, and so they tend to go for a whole lot of money when they do. So it's nice to have this available again if you've been looking for a way to add tons and tons of memory to your Apple IIe.
Yeah, and honestly, it would be worth it just for the VGA output, just as a way to attach that, because with Nishida Radio back in retirement, the options for VGA output for the 8-bits are slim once again. So if this functions as I think it does, that would be a great option for ditching the giant heavy CRTs.
I agree. Now, he's also posted something else in the enthusiasts group here, and it looks like this is a 1 meg RAM expansion plus a clock plugin for the 2C? I don't know what this is for. Is this the D-clock?
It is.
Did I just talk about this?
No, this is different. This is, I believe, a clone of like the ZRAM board.
Oh, okay.
With the clock built in. So it doesn't look like much because there's only like one chip on this thing, but it's actually like a megabyte of RAM all in one little tiny chip with the clock in there as well. I think it's got 2 or 3 chips on it or something, but then there's the battery for the clock as well. So yeah, it's a very unassuming looking board, but yeah, my understanding is that it's a clone of whatever it was, the ZRAM or the ZRAM Ultra that had the RAM and the ability to add the D-clock to it. It does not have the Z80, which I understand was an option on some version of that board. So you're not going to be running CPM with this. But this is fantastic because, again, this is one of those devices where they go for crazy money on eBay and everybody wants them.
This would be the ZRAM 2, I think.
There you go.
Then with if it doesn't have the Z80 chip, I think the only difference between either the 2 and the 3 or the Ultra or whatever the final designator that they were using is that one of them has the Z80 chip, the other one doesn't. So if you're not running CPM, you don't really need it anyway. There, of course, people like me, I just we have to have the latest and greatest, and it's got to be better than Sean Fahey's, So even if I don't need it, it's better than his, and that's what matters. It's kind of a shame that Applied Engineering did a lot of the really best hardware stuff that they put out came so late in the life of the Apple II that they ended up going out of business. Not a lot of it got bought, and so now it's hard to find some of it. It's really expensive. It's great that finally these guys are out there. Ultimate Micro and Plamen are cloning this stuff and making it available again.
For sure, yeah. The Applied Engineering was never a huge company, and a lot of these products were pretty niche. And as you say, it was towards the end of the company when the really great stuff came out. So a lot of it, they just didn't make very many of them. The market was small, and the company just didn't have a chance to make a lot of them. And so they're rare. I love the stuff. I don't know if these guys are reverse engineering those existing AE products or if they're just designing their own that does the same thing. But either way, we just have an embarrassment of riches on this stuff, enough to make any hardware side of the other retro computers look bad for sure.
I believe a lot of Applied Engineering's designs and their, the source code and stuff like that, no one knows where it is anymore, which makes the stuff hard to clone. And that's been kind of one of the, the rumors of some guy in Arizona out in a trailer in the middle of the desert, guarded by a pack of wild dogs that might have something or know somebody whose grandfather buried it out in the Sahara or something like that. But because that stuff all went away, and I guess nobody thought to hang on to it, or nobody ever stepped up and said, "Hey, we've got all this stuff." Up until now, it's been anything that's got those, the custom chips. It's been really difficult to clone, but finally, it seems like somebody figured out either a way around that, or maybe some source code or some documents were located.
Yeah, I suspect most of this stuff just honestly really isn't that complicated. The RAM cards and the clocks and stuff. It's mostly off-the-shelf chips and. Doing stuff, just sort of digging through the technical reference manuals for the machines to figure out where all the address lines are and stuff. So, I think the real coup de grace is of course the transwarped GS. Cloning that was just a masterpiece. So I got to think if Ultima Micro can clone that, then they can clone anything. Frankly, they definitely started at the high end of the difficulty curve with that product. So I think, it's just so amazing. I never would have guessed. Here we are, some 30 odd years later. And I can basically buy all those AE products that I used to drool over in the backs of the magazines. Yeah, I will say I'm going to miss the pink Applied Engineering disc envelopes. Those were the coolest. Or I guess the labels were pink. I don't remember if
something was pink. A lot of pink in there.
Yeah. So speaking of cool old stuff that we wish we could have had, and maybe now we can, Mike, there's some stuff going on with Mr. Westerfield over at the Byteworks. Is that right?
Right. So without making any kind of judgment or casting aspersions on anyone anywhere, some people in the community have reported having to wait perhaps longer than they like to get a hold of certain products that they buy. And one of those has been Mike Westerfield's Opus 2 software. It was all available, sort of. But like I said, I guess people were having trouble getting a hold of it. And so Mike caught wind of this and put out feelers on Facebook to determine whether it would be worth his time and energy to perhaps find another distributor and lower the cost a little bit. Because I think the big one that everybody seems to want is Opus 2, which I think is all of their software. And then there's another version or a deluxe pack or whatever that also has all the source code.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know, these Opus packages are like Orca C, Orca M, Orca Pascal, and the Orca Shell, and just sort of in various combinations and with or without source code.
Right. If you're new to the community, just to give you an idea, if you have ever done or will ever do any development on any version of an 8-bit Apple II computer, you're probably going to use or at least come across some of Mike's amazing products at one point or another. He really made it a lot easier to get the power of development into the hands of the people who wanted to do that rather than just the big companies and Apple. Not that Apple went out of their way to make it difficult or anything, but Mike certainly made it accessible.
Yeah, especially on the 2GS, the Orca C and Orca M package was really a tour de force for software development. I used to boot my machine into Orca Shell, and I used it exclusively that way. It's really that good.
I reached out to Mike maybe a week and a half ago about this, expressing my interest in being able to buy that again. And he said that at the time it wasn't available yet. He was still trying to settle on another digital distributor, but I'm seeing here in the show notes, Quinn, that maybe it's now available.
Well, yeah. So what I saw come across A2 Central was that he was trying to open source the Orca C compiler, particularly, possibly some of the other stuff as well, but I think he was going to start with Orca C. And he put it up on GitHub, and then moments later it was gone again. So if you were one of the lucky few who grabbed it while it was there, good on you, because my understanding is he wants to get the source code out there for people to use and improve upon. But there was some details of the GitHub license, I guess, that were not compatible with what he's trying to do here. So I don't know the details, but that's why it was pulled down again. So, but he has also said more recently that if you want to buy the stuff, you can buy it direct from him. Just send him an email at support@byteworks.us, and we'll have that link in the show notes as well. I don't know what the latest is with Syndicom and if you can still purchase it through them or not, but you can definitely buy it direct from Mike via email.
Syndicom a while ago decided to offer digital downloads on some of the purchases that you make, and I believe that this was one of the items where you could actually just pay and download it. So if you didn't want it sent, if you didn't need the actual printed out manuals or a disc, where you could do it yourself, then that was an option. It's a whole still, I think, murky, confusing situation that I don't know that we really want to get too deep into here, but it will be nice to have this legitimately available again from Mike himself. And if you don't want to dip your toes in that water, you don't have to.
All right. Well, speaking of old software being rebooted, Mike, what's going on with your former illustrious co-host, Mr. Gagney?
Well, Mr. Gagney has been busy, of course, in his absence from Open Apple, between producing JuiceGS and his podcasts. He also runs the Gamebits blog and does a lot of really great stuff for the community. And most recently, or at least recently, he played his way. He does a Let's Play on YouTube for various games. Not all of them, I think, are necessarily Apple II specific. In fact, I don't know if any of those are. I know he does a lot of console gaming. But he did a playthrough of the new King's Quest game. And this is on the PlayStation 4, but if you're a King's Quest fan, or if you listened to our show last month and you liked what Lane was saying about Sierra, you can watch Ken play this and decide if you want to go buy the game yourself.
Yeah, that's pretty good timing, actually. Tells you how out of the loop I am. I didn't even know King's Quest had been rebooted, so that's kind of neat. I watched this video, and it looks like a pretty good game if you're into the modern stuff.
I haven't dipped my toe into the King's Quest waters in a long time. And with all the other stuff that's coming out, I don't know that it's in my immediate plans, but if I happen to figure out how to live forever, yeah, I'll probably get to it someday.
Well, and I learned from over the fine folks over at Retro Computing Roundtable that Ken also has a new fragrance that he's working on. Yes, it's Retro by Gagne.
Oh my God.
So looking forward to that. All right, so I actually have my own King's Quest. I have my own King's Quest story, actually. So one of the things I loved about King's Quest was that it was a double high-res game, and there was tragically few of those on the 8-bit, because you could really can do some very nice-looking games on the 8-bits with double high-res. And however, when that game came out when I was very young and didn't really understand the difference between the enhanced 2E and the 2 Plus, and I thought, like many consumers did, I'm sure at the time, that it was just the memory was the only difference. So I had a 2 Plus, and I had a RAM factor card in it, a great big old RAM factor, had 512K on it. And in my naive little 10-year-old mind, I thought that was the same thing as an Apple IIe with 128K. If it was even better, because I had more of the KBs. And so I got, I begged, yes, so I begged and begged and begged for King's Quest for Christmas that year. And it was under the tree, and I was my mind was exploding from excitement. And of course, it didn't run. So I was very, very sad little Quinn that year. But was able to play it years later when we got a Laser 128. And actually, the RAM factor found new life, as I have talked about on the show, actually. The Laser 128EX has an unpopulated equivalent to the ZRAM built into it. I don't think a lot of people know that. So you can take the plastic shell apart, and inside there's just a bunch of chip sockets, and you can plug in the chips. And again, in my naivete, I didn't even know that RAM chips come in different kinds and different speeds, and maybe I should check if these are the right ones. But I just ripped them off my RAM factor and jammed them into these sockets inside my 128. And it worked great. I used it as a great big RAM disk for Protoss, and pirated many a game onto it. It was great.
Nice.
It was great for downloading from BBSs, because you could, download really large files onto it. So, which was often something you needed to do with BBSs.
Well, we've talked about Bill Buckles' software before on the show, and he's actually doing a whole lot of that, playing around with the double high res and really pushing it to its limits. In terms not only of what you can do on your old machine, but like creating an image and transferring it to your modern desktop easily, or going back the other way easily. He's got a lot of really great utilities, and we'll have a link to the show notes to his stuff. I think it's all freeware, and he's got some great write-ups over on Comsys Apple II, and I think he posts on the enthusiast group as well. But if you're not a Facebook type, I know it's all over there at CSA2. You can check that out. I believe wasn't double high res was it was an error, wasn't it? It was discovered by mistake. Is that right?
No, it was intentional. But it is a extremely challenging mode to program, which is why it never got much use, I'm sure. It's similar to 80 column text in that every other column is in the other memory bank. So they map, both 64K banks, the video RAM section of the original 64K, they map both banks into the same space. And so to draw a horizontal line, you literally have to flip the memory back and forth. But the cool thing about it is that you can get all 16 low-res colors, but on the high-res screen. If you do it that way, there's a couple of different ways to do it. You can also do it in black and white, where you get quite high resolution. That's what things like GEOST would do, is they would use double high res and black and white and get a really nice high res sharp picture. But the games would use it you can coerce it into generating 16 colors, but that limits your horizontal resolution to, I believe, 140. I believe it's only half of the high res screen, because they're using twice as many bits for the colors to get 16. But nevertheless, it basically makes it equivalent roughly to like the high-res mode on the Commodore 64, about the same resolution and color palette. So you can do some very, very nice-looking games. Once you get over that programming hurdle, you need to do some very clever programming to sort of get stuff on the screen. But it could be done, and lots of companies did it.
One thing to keep in mind if you're looking to buy an Apple IIe and you're wanting to get double high res capabilities, you got to make sure that you have the Revision B motherboard. And that gets a little confusing with part numbers and things, because Apple called two different versions of the board Revision A or something like that. So do a little research, and we'll have links to all this in the show notes, but make sure that you buy the correct revision of the motherboard, or the older Apple IIes won't do double high res. The board that you're actually looking for is going to be, the part number is 820-0064B. It's on the motherboard, I think, kind of along the back edge behind the slots. Or you can get the Platinum 2E. That one will also do it.
Yeah, I think if I was going to get a 2E, which I probably will at some point, to have fun with all the cards, I would probably honestly get a 2E Platinum. I have a soft spot for them. I don't know why. I always thought they were really cool looking.
You like the keypad, admit it.
Yeah, I guess I have fantasies of data entry. I don't know why, but something about the keypad, and I like the platinum color, and I guess because we had them at our school sort of at the tail end of the 8-bit era, and so that was it was the coolest one of all of them, I guess. So maybe that's why I like them.
I think Apple was selling them for like $100 or $200 at that point. So schools bought them like crazy because they already had a huge library of pirated educational software. So the hardware was pretty cheap, and they didn't have to pay $1,500 for a Mac. Only one of us, unfortunately, got to go to KansasFest this year, and it wasn't me.
Yes. So that is the elephant in the room, of course, is KansasFest. This is our first post-K-Fest show, and I'm amazed we've made it this far into the news without talking about it.
It was amazing. Nobody wants to talk about K-Fest for like a month after it happens.
That's right. Yeah, it's sort of the opposite, actually. You get back and there's all this traffic on the email thread and stuff. I always say that KansasFest kind of doesn't just end, it just sort of crossfades back into your normal life. And we're in that phase now. But it was amazing. This was my second K-Fest, and lots of the same people, which is great. Always great to see the familiar faces, and tons of new people. There was, I think they said 76 or so, or 73 or 76 attendees this year. It was the highest number since 1996. Really That's remarkable. Awesome. There was just people everywhere. The sessions were amazing. Burger Becky's keynote, like we talked about earlier in the show, was fantastic. There was, so many great sessions. I loved Dave Schmeck's Plasma Talk. Ian Johnson was back with his Japanese support in the 2GS. That was really cool. There was some awesome door games. Carrington Vanston won the door game contest with his Choose Your Own Adventure that he built out of this massive array of index cards that he stuck to his wall. That was a big hit. So Hackfest was amazing this year. We had, I think, was it 8 entries? And it was I was filled in as a judge this year for Hackfest, and it was incredibly hard to judge. I was sort of pitching in along with James Littlejohn and Michael Mahone, and we had a tough time with it because there was so many amazing entries that it was really hard to pick. So Carrington Vanston ended up winning that as well. This was the year of Carrington, apparently. Martin Hay, it was really hard to not give the victory to that, as good as Carrington's entry was, for anyone who didn't know. So we'll link to this in the show notes as well. That we have videos of all the Hackfest entries with a blurb explaining each of them. But so Carrington wrote a really cool sort of meta tic-tac-toe game that you sort of have to see to believe in. It had sound and animation and music, and it was just astonishingly polished and complete for having been written, at 3 a.m. and various evenings throughout the week. And Martin Hay, basically wrote his own ROM monitor, like Apple II equivalent ROM monitor for the Apple III with assembler and disassembler. That wasn't even what he set out to do. He just started out doing something on the Apple III and realized how bad the monitor is on it and decided, well, I can fix that. And so he wrote his own that lives entirely on sector 0 of a floppy and boots instantly. And by that, I do mean instantly. It's the video of that is amazing. You'll think you missed it. So anyway, there was just so much good stuff. I can't say enough amazing things about KansasFest. And what is also very cool is that the dates for next year have already been announced. So you can go plan that in your calendar right now. And in fact, of course, before saying that, I should have actually looked up what the dates are. So I am just going to ham it up here while I quickly look this up. I assume you'll be coming next year, Mike.
We'll see. While you're doing that, just real quick, you mentioned Martin Hay and his awesome Apple III assembler for the monitor, because the Apple III, you can pull up the monitor and you can see what's going on in memory, but there's no assembly. You can't really. It's kind of a really crippled version of what you find in the Apple II. So Martin wrote this completely awesome program that you can use in your Apple III. So now there's absolutely no reason to use an Apple II, but he will be on plug. He's going to be our guest on the next Drop 3 Inches. So keep your eye out for that. That should be out soon.
Capital. So July 19th through 24th, 2016 is the next KansasFest, and that will be again at Rockhurst University in Kansas City, Missouri. So run, don't walk to your calendars and mark that down.
You had mentioned that there were a lot of new faces there this year at KansasFest, and it looks like some of them were there to report on it.
Yeah, there was quite a nice combination of news post and podcast that came out on Vice.com. Vice is a kind of a pop culture site, and they have, I believe, the podcast section of it is called Motherboard, or possibly that's their tech column. I'm not sure which, but in any case, there was a couple of young fellows walking around with cameras and microphones at the show. And turns out they were these guys, and they did this very nice podcast, sort of a view of KFest as a first timer, as an outsider, more like. I guess they had just heard about this thing and were like, well, let's go see what this is all about. So they weren't necessarily Apple II people themselves, but just wondered what it was that makes 70 grown adults and some kids go sleep over together in Kansas City and talk about 30-year-old computers together every year. So it's a great podcast, great listen. It's got a bit of an NPR kind of feel, a little bit of This American Life, a little bit of Radiolab kind of feel to it, which it's a nice listen. And there's also an accompanying column, and the column and podcast have different content, so it's worth listening to both. And it's really, I would say, a great summary of the event. It's really, I think he hit all the high points. So if you have someone who's interested or curious about what all of this is about, you could link them to this. And I'm sure as next year's event approaches, we'll all be sharing this around as well to help spread the buzz.
And there's even a picture of James Littlejohn's Big Green Bus version 2.0. It's what it became. For those of you who have heard mention of it but haven't seen it yet, there's a picture of he turned it into this extra super long truck thing, and there's a photo of that now in the article. And now it does say that 4 a.m. was planning a big reveal of who he was. He's going to step on stage and accept his accolades. Did that happen?
That did not happen. He was there, and many of us know who he is now. But my understanding is he wishes to remain anonymous. For various reasons. Part because it's fun, and I guess possibly because some of what he's doing is still technically illegal. I'm not really sure. But he continues to do good work on Twitter, so we'll continue to follow him there.
You know, it's interesting. I asked Jason Scott a long time ago when he did his BBS documentary. There's kind of a little short section there on Apple, on piracy, and they've got like the Minneapolis and a couple of other well-known pirates who have decided to, hey, that was me. But there are a lot of people out there that still don't want to talk about it because I guess they're, some of these developers at the program at the companies took it really, really personal when their stuff got started showing up on the BBSs, and they're, I don't think the legal repercussions are a concern as much anymore, but other than just, maybe this guy's still out there looking for me, and if I show up and say that was me, who knows what's going to happen. So that's I know that's at least part of why we don't see a lot of these old pirates going, hey, here's what I did.
Yeah, I think that's true, and a reputation thing as well. Jason Scott's got a great story about so he put up a lot of Cracker splash screens on archive.org, and he added metadata for all of them with the hopes that, when these old crackers would get bored one day and Google themselves, they would find it. And he said it worked. He started getting contacted by some of these crackers, and one of them was, I guess, a high-profile CEO of a well-known company. And so he didn't want to reveal his identity, but he talked to Jason, I guess, through some sort of elaborate anonymization email service or something, and just sort of reminisced a little bit, but that was as far as it went as far as identifying this person. So that's probably a factor as well. They don't want their shareholders getting wind of it, because many of them are probably of that age now.
One last little KansasFest note here. If you haven't seen it yet, go to YouTube right now and watch KFest Funk. It's It's Dr. Steve Wyrick. I never get that right. I always pronounce that wrong.
Wyrick,
he did this awesome music video parody of K-Fest and Apple II stuff, and it's to the tune of Uptown Funk by Bruno Mars, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's really well done. Dr. Wyrick does great musical stuff, parody kinds of things. He did the intro, some of you may know, for the Floppy Days podcast. He did the Happy Days spoof for that, and it's really, really well done. So, yep, definitely great watch. Got to watch this K-Fest one.
Unfortunately, not everybody likes us as much, or at least doesn't have a sense of humor about people who want to go and have fun with their old computers. And weirdly, this comes from Cult of Mac, the editor there. posted a rather snarky and maybe a little bit slightly insulting, but come on, where's your sense of humor type of blog post about us as well, so you can go and vent at him.
They're just jealous because they're not having any fun, because nobody cares about their old computers. Sorry, John Leake.
The creator of your vintage computers is dead.
That's right. Oh, zing.
Bazinga.
Send your hate mail to Mike McGinnis.
It's really not that bad. Caney, I think his name is. Leander Caney is the editor of Cult of Mac.com, and he does, I don't know if it's every week or whatever, but he does a little short video podcast of him in his office talking about whatever he wants to talk about. And he kind of goes through and sort of has the same response I think probably you had last year, Quinn. Mind blown about people like going and having a great time, and it's not awful. And, about KansasFest. So I imagine, or at least I hope that, some of this buzz will carry to next year and we'll have even more people.
Yeah, it's funny, the aspect of it that's easy to condescend about, a bunch of, cranky old people get together and play with these, obsolete computers. That same thing is kind of what Jason Scott always says he loves about KFest, which is, the sincerity of it. It's just this sort of unironic, nothing to prove appreciation and adoration of this stuff. If all people are welcome, and if you just have an Apple II in your life or it means something to you in some way, come on down and, we will appreciate it with you with no judgment and unironically. We just like them. All right, well, we could go on and on about KansasFest, but we should probably move on to some other news items here. Looks like some GS news on the heels of Burger Becky's appearance at KFest. Is that right?
So with all the great stuff that Becky's doing now with her updated releases and digging through her old archives and finding stuff that we just love to see. We talked about this, I think, a month or two ago. She released the source code for Space Ace and put it online. About a week ago, somebody named Will Scullin posted that he had compiled the Space Ace source. It has shots of it running on his 2GS, and it looks like Burger Becky jumped in there and to help out with that. So that's really cool, because it's one thing to have the old source code out there, but it's just such a witch's brew of variables and getting the right hardware and the right versions of compilers. Sometimes if you go back far enough, that it can be some dark arts sometimes getting that source code to compile and run, especially the old stuff.
Yeah, for sure. It's there's lots of source code being released these days for old software, but it's quite another thing entirely to actually get it to build and run. You don't have whatever obscure homebrew build environment the person might have used, or, whatever, some compiler they used that doesn't exist anymore, or, like Becky was talking about, trying to get AppleWorks GS to run again. I mean, you'd have to somehow replicate the APW environment. And it's a real achievement by Will and Becky here to get the actually building and running again with the original assets and everything. It's very cool looking.
I remember when Jordan Mechner released the source code for Prince of Persia a while back, and a few people tried to compile, and I think they eventually got a working copy of it, but there were definitely some odd contortions and corners cut or dark alleys taken to get there.
Yeah.
So it's cool that it doesn't look like it was actually that difficult to get the source up and running for Space Ace.
Yeah, well, like Becky said, she's very meticulous about maintaining her old source code and her old build environments and stuff as well. So she had an easier time of it than I think most people would. Recently, a recent show we talked about Jordan Mechner releasing the source code for Prince of Persia, and I downloaded that, and I made a brief effort to try and get it to run, but it became quickly clear that this was not going to be trivial to get this thing to actually build and run. And I know that has been done. There is someone out there who did that. I forget who, but again, without the original art assets and all the build environment and everything, it can be extremely challenging. Well, so moving along, speaking of old games, if I wanted to get dysentery, but really fast, how might I go about doing that, Mike?
Well, you could, I don't know if this would give you dysentery, and I'm pretty sure it wouldn't solve it if you did get it, but Games Done Quick, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's a group of people that play video games as fast as possible from start to finish for charity. They take donations and pledges and things like that. took a shot at the Oregon Trail on an Apple IIe, a real piece of hardware there, and they finished it in 5 minutes and 33 seconds.
That's pretty great. Speed runs are fascinating to me. I've watched a lot of them for modern games as well, and it is quite astonishing how fast most of these modern games can be done if you really know what you're doing. A game that might take me many, many hours can often be solved in just a couple of minutes. It's pretty crazy.
I remember I think the first time I saw someone do a speed run, it was through the original Quake, because id Software had put the recording capability. You could record yourself playing it. It would save it out as like a AVI file or something like that. And it was just amazing watching these people play from start to finish. And it's, I guess, an accomplishment. I don't know if that would go on your tombstone necessarily, but it doesn't seem like it's a lot of fun at that point.
Yeah, I think it shows sort of a passion for the game. Kind of, you really have to love a game to explore it enough to find these little tricks to get through it, quicker, to optimize the path through the game. One of the most memorable speedruns that I watched was one of the older the Elder Scrolls games for the Xbox. Those are huge Bethesda RPGs that are designed to take hundreds of hours, and there's a playthrough of one of them that's just a couple of minutes, and it's
Wow.
it involves running to a cave near where you start and making a bunch of potions, and then using kind of a trick to cast the spell that teleports you to this wizard at the very end of the game. And it's it's this amazing series of maneuvers that's fully legal. There's no hacking or anything involved. It's completely within the bounds of the game. But I can only imagine how many hundreds and hundreds of hours it would take to sort of figure out that such a path exists, and then sit down and record it. So, that's a real love of gaming right there.
I do love seeing smart, innovative players coming up with ways to play within the game and succeed where the developer didn't necessarily intend you to, but you're not cheating. You're not relying on a bug or changing any code or anything like that. I think one of the most famous examples that I remember was when they killed Lord British in Ultima Online.
Yes, that was amazing. I was actually playing Ultima Online at the time.
That was a huge deal, and it was by the rules. They didn't, there was no hacking, nothing really. Still got banned I think they still got banned, but but just you've made something wonderful that we love, and we're gonna expand and build on this in ways that you didn't expect.
That's right.
It's such a cool thing.
Yeah, and Ultima Online was an early lesson in MMOs, I think, for a lot of developers, because the developers vastly underestimated how much of that kind of thing players were going to try and do. And so Ultima Online was just riddled with things like that. People building houses, in the middle of the road, and people, blocking each other in, trapping each other on islands. I mean, people did so much of that they had to continually be making massive changes to the gameplay to prevent people from just trolling each other and just being terrible people to each other. It was quite a Wild West.
That's kind of hilariously sad, Human ingenuity and the spirit of innovation and discovery leads us to screw each other over like that.
Exactly.
At least what we do online.
Yeah, at least in an online world where there's, in theory, no consequences, I guess.
Okay, well, we've been talking a little bit about games today, obviously, and we asked Becky about Wasteland 2. She wasn't involved in that, but I still love the heck out of that game. I'm pretty sure you did too, Quinn. I know a lot of my friends had a great time playing it, and if you want to go back and revisit it, there's going to be a director's cut release. Is that right?
Yeah, it looks that way, and I will definitely be checking that out. I like to say I'm also a huge Wasteland fan, and the Wasteland 2 reboot is very, very cool. So nice to see a new version with a little extra content.
Now, right now, it looks like it's at least initially going to only be released on the Xbox One in middle of October. Typically, that's how it goes these days, I think. Is that one platform will get exclusivity for a little while, and then you'll see other versions. So hopefully, if you don't have an Xbox One and you still want to play, you'll have a chance to do that.
Yeah, that's a bit of a coup, actually. That's shows the sign of a sign of the health of the indie gaming industry these days. That an indie game kickstarted like this can actually get an Xbox One exclusive. But yeah, I'm sure we'll see this on other platforms later on.
All right. So, this next topic is interesting.
Yeah, so there's to paraphrase Carrington Vanston from the RCR, if you've been holding off upgrading from GSOS 601 on your 2GS for 25 years, it's you're clear to go ahead and do that upgrade now, because GSOS 6.02 and now, as of this recording, 603 have been released, and this is kind of a community effort. I know there's a lot of people that have contributed to this. They have a number of prominent 2GS programmers have brought all of their various hacks and spot fixes for the bugs that were in System 6 together, and kind of put out this sort of unofficial 602 update to GSOS, and now 603. So this is pretty exciting. And I think the original version was released by Antoine Vigneault and Bill Martins, who we've talked a lot about on the show. But my understanding is that Andrew Rohan and Ian Johnson and a number of other folks have all, their work is all in here as well. Is that right?
Yeah, that's what I'm gathering. Over the years, obviously, we've had plenty of time to wrestle with 2GS bugs and workarounds, and Nathan Mates way back before he had his meltdown and stormed off, and was doing, he did these things called GUP updates, the Grand Unified Patch Program, I think is what it stands for, and it was sort of a collection of fixes and patches that he and other people had come up with that he compiled, and you would just load this, you put the disk in your drive, and I think it was a CDEV or something like that, and it would run in the background and sort of swat the bugs. I don't think it actually patched any code. I could be wrong on this, but it made it a lot nicer to use some of the features in on the 2GS, because there's one really hideous HFS bug that could zap files and destroy data, and there was a bunch of stuff that Apple never got around to fixing it. Now, we should say that Apple is not involved with 602 or 603 at all. This is purely a community thing, but I guess there's been some developers who were surprised to find their code in these new releases, and I don't know. I haven't obviously gone through every single byte of code, but I guess not everything's been maybe credited. I'm not sure.
Yeah, if you're one of the developers who had your work included in this, by all means, let us know. We'd love to give credit where it's due on the show here. I think, there's a bit of confusion here about how and when it was released, and maybe not everybody was aware that their work was in this, but it's great to have all these bugs fixed for GSOS, and great to see continued development for it. So definitely, if you're involved in this project in any way, definitely let us know at feedback@open-apple.net, and we'll spread the word.
We should say that we are not hardened investigative journalists. We're not Woodward and Bernstein, and we're not even the Bernstein Bears. So you're not going to see a lot of dirt slung on this, I hope, but it would be nice if there are people who were not credited, then it would be nice to see them get the credit that they were due for the code that they contributed.
For sure. Yeah, we're just a couple of schmucks with microphones, and we're happy to see any new efforts on the GS and 8-bit platforms, and hopefully no feelings are getting hurt here.
Right, as per usual, you can just send your hate mail directly to me.
Definitely. Well, speaking of...
and I actually forgot to I don't think we talked about one of the coolest features was the auto updating. I haven't played around with this too much, but I guess it's possible now to basically you can install the thing. One, you don't have to deal with the 6 floppies anymore. There's I don't know, it's called I forget what it's called, I think it was like a unified installer or something like that. But instead of having 6 different GSOS floppies that you had to keep swapping through, now it's just one file, and it if you have net access, you can download patches directly to the operating system. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. That's really cool, and it also includes the Ethernet drivers as well, for like Ethernet and so on. So, if you can get your GS on the internet that way, that's all much better integrated now. Yeah, it's a very cool effort. Glad to see more GS development in any way, shape, or form.
And it is kind of funny to see the Apple blogs freak out about it. There's a bunch of posts on blogs that are typically Mac blogs that are just like shocked as hell that this is happening. It's like, come on, guys, been here the whole time, developing stuff the whole time.
Yeah, every so often our community gets a little periscope goes up into the mainstream, usually through no fault of our own. And this is one of those items that for whatever reason broke through the noise. And I saw this on Hackaday. I saw this in a comment thread on Boing Boing.
Mac Rumors.
Yeah, Mac Rumors, I think Cult of Mac ran it. So yeah, it's awesome how every so often the mainstream kind of gets a little window into our crazy band of broken toys down here at KFest and related communities banging away on this stuff. So yeah, we're still here and we're still working on this stuff just because we love it.
Since we're on the topic, I'll jump down the list a little bit here. There was an Ars Technica editor that found an Apple II Plus in his parents' garage or basement and was asking people what he should do with that. So that's definitely spawned some interesting conversations over on ours, and we'll have a link in the show notes. Quinn, what would you do if you found a 2 Plus in your parents' attic?
I would write software for it and build hardware for it, just like I'm doing. It's every time one of those threads comes up, they seem to come up more and more often now with the increasing popularity of retro computing. I see it a lot on Hackaday, for example, and every time I see one of these threads, I always jump in and I'm like, hey, here's what KansasFest is, and here's, A2 Central, and here's Ultimate Micro, and there's actually a whole lot of stuff going on by a lot of very smart people. Because the tone of these articles is usually like, oh, wow, look at this useless old stupid thing that no one would ever care about. Let's do something ridiculous with it as a stunt, for this one-off blog post or whatever. And then the threads always really quickly fill up with, OMG, Oregon Trail, and my first computer was
Appleworks.
This, and I did this with it. And yeah, it just immediately fills up
Print
with
shop.
with these people who had these things because frankly, most computer users of a certain age had some access to an Apple II. And so, the thread rapidly fills up with these personal anecdotes. And so, I just kind of like to sneak in there with some facts about what's actually going on now today, and that this isn't some sort of cheap stunt for an Ars Technica column or whatever. I would encourage our listeners to do the same. Just kind of go in there and post and say, hey, here's a link to KansasFest, and here's a link to lots of other cool Apple II stuff.
So you're the one responsible for keeping this community alive.
That's right. I'm personally, yes.
It's just you.
Yes, this community that I've only been in for a year. I'm the personal savior of it. No, it's efforts like that actually brought me into it. So, it's listening to podcasts. And, I found retro computing podcasts kind of through blog posts like that. I think the very first one I listened to was Earl Evans's Retro Bits. And from his podcast, I kind of slowly moved my way around and suddenly at some point I found Open Apple, and, everybody was talking about KansasFest. And that's how you get pulled in. This is a comment on a blog post like this is kind of the gateway drug to KansasFest. So the more the merrier.
First one's free.
That's right. Well, speaking of KansasFest, as we are wont to do, I had a lot of people. I proudly wore my Open Apple T-shirt to KansasFest this year.
Yeah.
And Mike and I, for fun, at one point last year, made each other shirts.
No one else can have one. Yeah.
Well, yes, it turns out that might be true. We've been meaning for a while to actually set up a store where people could buy Open Apple T-shirts. And after KFest, during KFest, people were constantly asking me, hey, can I have one of those shirts? Or can I buy one of those shirts? And so when I got home from KFest this year, I was like, all right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to set this up. And we got permission from the gracious and wonderful Peter Neubauer to use his artwork. He, of course, did our logo for anyone who doesn't know. And I set up the Cafe Press store, and it was up for, I think, 8 hours. And we got a letter from their legal department saying you can't use that image because some bot, I guess, identified the Apple logo in the image.
The rainbow colors.
Yes, that's the silly thing. It's not even really their logo anymore, and it's so small and in the corner. And it's.
You could have pointed out that this has been on Apple's own iTunes store forever, which they approved. But I think because if we did this, you would have to buy the T-shirts, so there's money being exchanged, and that's when lawyers get interested. I don't,
Yeah.
I really don't think Apple would care one way or the other if we
No.
charge $15 for a T-shirt. But I get why Cafe Press is afraid of that and doesn't want to go there. And
Yeah.
I'm sure we'd get the same thing at Zazzle or one of these other sites. Although I did see a thread on the enthusiast group where I think the sponsors of the recent French Apple II get-together that just happened, I think last weekend, created a little T-shirt using an actual, I think that was an official Apple design with the kind of it's the apple on the rainbow apple on the right side, and it's angled upward, and there's like the streaking rainbow up to it from the lower portion of the left side of the shirt, which I think is actually an Apple design as well. And they have a store up, but it may be a little bit different because they're in France. I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder. Yeah, and yeah, as you say, it makes perfect sense. I mean, there's no upside to permitting the design for Cafe Press. I mean, it's not, they know they're not going to make much money, and the risk of legal action, even if that risk is very small, there's just no upside to it for them. I mean, the way Cafe Press works is, they make money from your design, and then they give you what they call a royalty in exchange. So, we were just trying to put the shirts up there and just break even, just so people could have them, but it's not going to work that way. We may try and print some up at Custom Ink, something like that, and physically, you can make these shirts for yourself one at a time. So we might try to make some and just physically bring them to KFest next year to be sold, but no promises on that. It depends how big our luggage is.
Ken and I actually talked about that way back when, maybe doing T-shirt sales or even, if we had we have a guest on, offering them a free T-shirt just for having been on. The problem that we kept running into was, well, okay, so do we, we're going to have to order 10 shirts in each size, in each color, in each cut, just because somebody might want that one instead of this one. It's we're not running a retail store here, so it's not like we're, concerned, trying to manage inventory, but it does present sort of a problem. I guess maybe, and I can cut this later if we need to, but maybe an option would be that you could write in and tell us your size and cut, and we'll send us the money and we'll send you a T-shirt. I don't know.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, we can't necessarily stock a million sizes, and then we would risk somebody not getting one who wanted one at the show, and that would be really sad. So, yeah, we'll keep working on this.
Maybe maybe on the KFest list next year, when it gets to be that time, we can just announce, hey, we'll have some T-shirts. Let us know your preferred size and color and stuff, and we'll just print them and bring them. And I don't know, but it would be nice to be able to get them out there. But because we decided to go with that logo, it has presented some twists in the tail, if you will. And if anybody has maybe an idea for an easy way for us to do this that doesn't involve Cafe Press, let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Since we can't stop talking about Steve Jobs around here, in addition to not only the documentary that Mike's been talking about incessantly for months now, and there's another documentary that's coming out. That's an indie one, I guess, and that's playing at the local indie film fest or the indie film festivals and things right now. Steve Jobs will now be in opera.
Oh, goody. That's all I have to add to that.
All right. Well, I think I can maybe come up with a little bit more to say. The New York Times is reporting that the Santa Fe Opera has announced that its next commissioned work will be the Revolution of Steve Jobs, with the R in the kind of the registered trademark with the parens around it. And of course, the usual "don't call it iOpera" jokes apply. Yes. And yes, we have a Woo section. We will not have a Jobs news section in the same naming fashion.
Yeah, that would not be appropriate.
No.
All right.
Or just very confusing.
Yes.
Just us yelling Jews.
Yes. We are an open and inclusive podcast here, folks. So we've talked about Business Insider a few times on this show. They often have retro-themed posts that crop up, but they don't have the best reputation for getting things right, do they?
Well, this is the online rag, I guess, That
tabloid.
There you go, tabloid. That's good. I think we talked about them like a month or two ago, where they basically reposted the same Apple II story with a different headline 2 years later.
Oh, yeah, right.
But they have an article called "The 12 Best Tech Commercials of All Time," and the first one listed is for the 1984 Super Bowl ad that Apple did for Macintosh. Unfortunately, Business Insider doesn't know it's for Macintosh.
Oh, Business Insider. You're so wacky.
The headline is, as they wrote it, reads, "Apple's 1984 Super Bowl ad put the company and its Apple II computer on the map." And the funny thing is the embedded video right below it that's actually on YouTube says it's for the Macintosh.
Clearly they have some interns putting together this blog post or whatever.
I need to get a job there, man, because I could stand to get paid and like not pay attention to anything that I'm doing and just post stuff. That'd be great.
Yeah, it seems to be pretty low bar there to write blog posts for Business Insider. So meanwhile, we got Time Magazine doing a little bit of blogging as well. What's going on here?
Right, so this is, I think this is Harry McCracken. The page is loading. Hold on a second. No, this is not. This is posted by Lily Rothman. I'm not familiar with that reporter, but I know that there was such a thing called the Tandy Company, and apparently they made some computers or something that came out around the same time as the Apple II. I don't really know why I'm talking like Stewie Griffin right now.
Yeah, I don't know. There was other computers, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, and the headline is "The Personal Computer That Beat Apple for a While." But it's actually a well-written piece about the TRS-80 and Tandy's early efforts to get into and stay alive in the computer industry. And because we had some TRS folks show up at KansasFest this year, I thought it might be a little appropriate.
Yeah, why not? We're trying to. The KansasFest is a big tent, folks. So people should not be afraid to come to KansasFest, even if you're a TRS-80 user.
No, get out.
Yeah, there was actually a lot of talk this year at K-Fest because we had quite a large Atari contingent, and as Carrington said, we didn't spray for Atari, and this year there's more of them, and there was even a certain Commodore user, Mr. Whalen, was there as well. But as long as one of your computers is an Apple II, then we don't care.
Well, I think the solution to that's actually pretty simple. It's like when you're trying to get rid of the Kiefer Sutherland vampires that are living in your abandoned hotel. You just have to kill the head vampire. Just make sure that Kevin Savitz doesn't show up, and that'll take care of the problem.
That's right. Yeah, Kevin Savitz brings.
He's the head Atari
goes.
vampire, Boo Atari.
All right. So I think that's all the news we have. Is that right?
Looks like it. No woos this month. Darn it.
We had a lot last month, so let's give the folks a break.
Yeah, I think we're probably gonna filter some of that, maybe to things that are more directly appropriate to Apple II, and less about, hey, you showed up at this college to talk.
Yes. Here's what Woz thinks about everything.
Right.
Just kidding, Woz. We love you.
Oh.
Well, I don't think we have any eBay either, which makes perfect sense because we don't talk about eBay on this show. So why don't we move on to Weird Gaming?
You know Choplifter, you know Load Runner, but do you know this? It's time for a weird game.
So my pick this month is Windwalker, the 2GS version. Last month, as we were talking about the game, you got me enthused about it because it seemed to be, I had avoided Windwalker because of how bad Mobius was, but you convinced me that there was some merit, and so I played it for a while on the 2E version and on my 2E, and it was great. I had a great time, but I kept thinking, man, I thought there was, it came out so late. I swore there was like, I swore seeing boxes. I could remember seeing boxes of the 2GS version at Egghead and things. And it turns out that yes, there also was a 2GS version of Windwalker. And I just thought that we should mention that because it is different. The interface is different enough that it's, I think, also worth a playthrough. In addition to the slightly upgraded graphics, you also have mouse interaction, which you don't with the Apple IIe. So, for example, when you're in combat and you're sliding back and forth and you're doing your little kung fu moves, you can click on there's like little shadow figures along the bottom of the screen now, the bottom of the window now that you can click on, and when you do it, he will attempt to execute that move, and you can, if you click on 2 or 3 of them at a time, it'll try to chain them together. I found that you end up just dying if you do that, but if you're a fan of this game like I now am, then you should definitely check out that version.
Very cool. Yeah, it's an interesting game for sure. I think I'd forgotten that there was a 2GS version, so thanks for reminding me about that.
Oh, and the music is different, and there's a little bit different text as well. So yeah, it's not just an Apple IIe game running on a 2GS.
Cool. Wow, we pulled you away from your 8-bits and your Apple III to play a GS game. That might be a record on Open Apple.
It's crazy. I got to get away from you.
So my pick this month is a game called Acid Trip. Now, this is definitely getting back to the roots of weird gaming.
You sure this is a game and not just something you did?
Yes. Well, you'll wonder after playing this thing. I was feeling a little bit guilty about just using this segment, or I should say abusing this segment for whatever game I feel like talking about. This is a game from the deep dark corners of the Apple II game development community from back then. And it's how to describe this thing. It's sort of an adventure game and an arcade game. And it's just written by a fellow named Demetrius Cross. And I suspect that's a pseudonym. And so, I'm not even going to attempt to describe the gameplay on this thing. You're just going to have to play it. The title screen will tell you everything you need to know about it. It's definitely a trippy looking title screen, clearly made with Graphics Magician, for those of you who are interested in those things. The names of the levels, to give you a taste, there's 4 levels. They are called The Trip Begins, The Guardian's Playpen, The Astral Cyclone, and Shades of a Robot. All right.
Oh, no.
So, you play Hector Cherney, who just dropped 600 micrograms of LSD, and you basically play his trip off the Earth and back again. So the author says there are 4 levels finished now, but 9 to 12 will be in the final version. Perhaps the author did a little too much role-playing of his own game because those levels never appeared. But
he just went off on his own trip and never came back.
It's right, but the original 4 levels are here and they are playable, and it's weird and it's a game. So here it is in Weird Gaming. It plays perfectly fine in Virtual Apple II, courtesy of the Call Apple folks. So we will link to that in the show notes. And if you want to see something that this is the kind of game, I'm sure it was only distributed on BBS's. In fact, it's fun. You look in the instructions, still have a reference to something called the Lynx BBS in the 305 area code. The phone number is here, and the author asks you to send him an email on that BBS for his opinion. So no doubt that's how this was distributed on BBS's. It's
Let us
weird.
know if he writes back.
Yes, I would love to know. Someone call that BBS and see if it's still there. 305-772-1076. Actually, don't call it because someone else probably has that phone number now.
I apologize to the sweet old lady that answers the phone.
Yes, we deeply apologize to whoever now has that phone number. Both of our listeners are now going to call you. So there you go. That's my pick this month for Weird Gaming. Let's roll on into feedback.
You've listened to us talk. Now it's time to tell us what you think.
So we got lots of good feedback this month. This first email is one of my favorites. In fact, possibly one of my favorites that we've ever received. It's from listener Glenn. And, a couple months ago we talked about Orphan Black, and there was a brief cameo of an Apple II monitor and possibly a DOS 3.3-esque catalog display in that show when they dug up an old computer for part of their mystery. So listener Glenn wrote in and says, "Hi folks, I was listening to the podcast and thought it was cool you picked up on my Apple IIe monitor on Orphan Black." Apparently it was Glenn's. He goes on to say, "My brother has been a set dresser on season 2 and 3 of that show. He asked me if I had a couple of monitors they could use for that scene. So I rented them 3 and they chose the Apple IIe monitor. I also provided them some screenshots of what the font looked like on the Apple IIe and they doctored it up on the screen to show what they wanted. So there you go. That's why it was an Apple IIe monitor, and that's why it had a distinct DOS 3.3 look to that display. He
Cool.
said, he goes on to say, I squirmed a bit when they showed it with an IBM XT, but hey, this is the TV business we're talking about. Keep up the great podcasting. Well, thank you, Glenn. I absolutely loved that email. You know, I never even imagined that we might get the backstory behind how that Apple IIe monitor happened to make an appearance on a major TV show like that. So it looks like the Open Apple podcast listenership is a little more wide-reaching than we thought.
Yeah, that's really, really odd. I figured, you know, all 6 of our listeners are down in the basement and they just gather around this old-time Victrola and listen to us, and, you know, it's all crackly and hissy, and they sit around the fire and poke the logs and call each other ma and pa or something. I don't know, but certainly didn't figure anyone in Hollywood would have anything to do. Not because they would hate us necessarily, just because they probably had better things to do, but that's pretty awesome.
That is indeed. Cool. Well, moving right along, we've got listener Olivier who writes to us from France, and he's writing with regards to the Tony Diaz interview from a couple months ago. And Tony mentioned, I think that he wasn't sure if maybe the ROM 3 was only sold in the U.S. or if it was available in other countries.
Oh, right. Mm-hmm.
And Olivier says that yes, in fact, the ROM 3 was available in France in May of 1990. So every 2GS sold after June 1990 in France was a ROM 3. So that's good to know. That actually makes sense because I remember in the FTA demos, there was references to ROM 1s and ROM 3s because they deemed the ROM 1 to be the superior of the two for some reason. And so they used to take cheap shots at the ROM 3.
It's a tricky thing when you're trying to track down manufacturing history, probably with any company, but Apple, even back then, you know, when they weren't maybe necessarily as secretive as they are now, but they didn't publish anything. You know, in fact, I think it was Antoine who set up that big spreadsheet for Apple IIgs serial numbers to try and figure out how many were produced, because Apple never said. Tracking some of that stuff down can be tough, and it's neat to hear from somebody who has knowledge of that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so moving right along, we've got next up listener Gary writes in, and he says, I guess he was listening to our Tony Diaz episode during KansasFest this year. He wasn't at KFest, but happened to listen to the show during KFest, and he lives in the area. So I guess he says he wanted to get out there Saturday, but was unable to make it. So I guess he just missed us. So hopefully we'll see you again next year, Gary. Thanks for writing in.
Ooh, Gary.
Moving along, we've got listener Tony writes in. Hello, Mike, Quinn, and all former Open Apple hosts. As a result of listening to Open Apple, I have finally seen Halt and Catch Fire via Netflix and now record each new weekly episode. He says I've also burned through all episodes of the IT Crowd, again from hearing about it on Open Apple. Well, great. He says I'm also a subscriber of at least 1 year to Juiced GS. That's an excellent choice. And I enjoy listening to Open Apple and many other podcasts on my daily commute, and often joke that I wish my commute were longer. I do not share that wish with you. I have a long commute as well.
I feel kind of bad for you, Tony. I mean, I'm glad that you're discovering Apple II through our show, but it makes me kind of sad.
Well, we'll endeavor to flap our gums a little longer for the commute. So he says, especially since I recently started a new job, which is 2.2 miles closer to home. He goes on to say that's a little less, that's a little more than 12 to 15 minutes of fun-filled, fact-packed 8-bit history and podcast time in Silicon Valley. So let's see. There's other acquisitions as a result of being an Open Apple listener. Stephen Wyrick's book, which I believe is titled Sophistication and Simplicity. He's bought himself a license for Virtual 2. He's bought himself the new WASPack. He's bought himself Chris Torrance's assembly lines and PDF copies of the originals. So there you go. The power of the Open Apple podcast to sell other people's stuff. We are happy to be a voice for those who are doing good work in the community. He says he really enjoyed listening to Tony Diaz rattle off Apple II history like it was yesterday. That guy is amazing. Yes, he is. And he has the impedance of every trace in the Apple II memorized. I would not be surprised. Then he goes on to ask actually about our show notes, which is, I'm glad he asked because I don't think we talk about that very much. Well, we talk endlessly about the fact that show notes exist, but perhaps not where you can actually find them. So in case anyone doesn't know, you can go to open-apple.net and our show notes are on there. Each episode gets a little blurb, and there's a more link that you can click there, which will expand to detailed show notes, bullet point lists of basically everything we talk about, and a link to what we're talking about. So you can look at that while you're listening, or if you listen to the show on your iPod, the iPod where it shows the big Open Apple logo in the middle, if you tap that, it will actually just show you the show notes there as well. So that's my favorite way to do it with other people's podcasts, is you do that. And that allows you to just tap right on the links on your phone while you listen. So all good options for the show notes. I hope people read them because it takes me a lot of time to generate those. Not as long as it takes Mike to edit, but long enough. Okay, moving along. The last email I've got is from listener Ben, who says, I just picked up a WAS Edition 2GS from the basement of a restaurant. It has a GS RAM card with 4 of the 6 megabytes full. So that's a pretty good find. He's asking if he wants to fill up the rest of it. He's asking what kind of RAM chips he needs to do that. And I don't have the answer to that off the top of my head, but if listeners know what kind of RAM chips he should use, by all means, write us in and we'll pass that information along. It says he also found some external drives and an image writer, all of which had half an inch of gunk covering it. So always nice to hear about an Apple II being rescued from the basement of a restaurant. I bet it had grease and all kinds of nastiness all over it. So thanks for writing in, Ben. And do you have any feedback for us, Mike?
Yeah, I actually have 2. The first is from Todd George, and he's another relatively, I guess, newcomer to the Apple II community, and he's writing in to complain. In fact, the title of his email is Hate Mail. He says, yeah, nobody actually sending hate mail uses that subject line. I do have an extra grind, though. I just bought an Apple IIgs off of Craigslist. I'm a Commodore guy since 1983 or so. I still have my original Commodore. I still have my original Commodore 64 and 128. Do you see the problem here? Well, yes, you still have your Commodores. That's the problem.
Clearly.
He says, he goes on to say, you've ruined me with all your incessant talk about Apple, and I'm in, and there's no turning back. I hate you guys. Seriously, though, I love the podcast. I keep thinking about recording some feedback in case you wanted to play it on the air, but haven't got around to that, so I thought I'd send an email instead. I decided to send it now as I just got back from the Craigslist deal, and I'm excited to tear into the new-to-me retro gear. In fact, I listen to Open Apple during my hour-long commute every day. I also listen to the short ride. I also listen on the short ride to and from the 2GS pickup, as I figured that was only the right thing to do. It's your fault after all. A long time ago, as I was working through your back catalog of shows, you had mentioned you're downsizing your collection a bit. By you, I mean Mike, as it sounds like he is typically responsible for reading the hate mail. Yep, I sure am. Just in case Quinn sees this instead. I don't know if this project ever happened or maybe is continuing to happen, but if so, I am in the market for a 3.5-inch floppy drive for the 2GS. And Todd, I will email you after the show about that. And the rest of the paragraph is details about that. He says, I didn't get to KansasFest due to work schedule conflicts, but I'm fully planning on attending next year. Well, Todd, that's because your priorities are all wrong. Above all else, keep up the awesome work. And he says he's loving the addition of Quinn.
Oh, well, thank you. And if you come to KansasFest, you will walk away with more 3.5-inch drives than you know what to do with.
Yes, some Apple II items are difficult to find and expensive, and others are more than you know what to do with. And if you're in the hobby, they just seem to appear in your garage, in your closet, and wherever else you store stuff. I don't know how that happens, but I'll email you after we're done recording. Let's see, and I don't know why I'm telling you that, because you'll leave us long after that. We did get a comment on the website posted to last month's show, the one that we did with Elaine Nooney. This is from Peter, and I'm sort of confused here. He's got 2 quotes. The first one says, "You did it, Peter, the first real crack of Raston." And the second one says, "Very good, so the back door is now found." And then he simply says, "Antoine didn't complete either of the challenges."
Okay.
So if we made that error, then we apologize, and thank you for pointing it out, Peter.
Indeed. All right. Well, if you would like to write us here on the show, by all means, drop us an email at feedback@open-apple.net. We always love to hear from you.
Yep. Looking forward to it. And hopefully this won't be another 3-hour show.
And then there's one thing I'd like to add just before we close out. People have asked to buy our T-shirts partly to sort of help support the show, and we really, really appreciate that. Running the show does cost us money, actually, mainly Mike. And so we're going to be setting up a Patreon. And so if you want to contribute to the show, that would be a great way to do it. A couple bucks here and there, anything you feel like contributing to that would really help us out, defer the costs of hosting the audio and running the show. And so we will have the details on that in the show notes for you to hopefully direct your generosity. If you like the show, then by all means, and of course the show is always going to be free, so don't worry about that. But if you're feeling generous, we would sure appreciate it. All right, Mike, it's been another great month. If you've got nothing else to add, I think we can wrap it up.
I think that does it for me. Thank you again, Quinn. And again, it was great having Burger Becky on. It's always wonderful to hear from people who are not only those who are contributing today, but those who made all this possible back in the day. Like she said that she's worked on way more than 250 games. Not granted, I'm sure a lot of that includes more modern stuff, but still, I mean, just the body of her work and the contribution to Apple. To the Apple II community has been amazing. So it's great when somebody like that will, not only come back and start contributing again, but, take some time to talk to us about it here on the show and at KansasFest.
Yeah, big thanks to Becky for joining us here this month.
All right, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Bye, everyone.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Subscribe to us in iTunes or visit us at open-apple.net, where you can browse our extensive catalogue of past episodes or read our blog. If you like what you've heard today, or even if you didn't, your comments, questions or ideas are always welcome. Send them to feedback@open-apple.net.
Quinn calls Taco. Listen to some crazy lady talk about Apple IIs for 3 hours.
Quinn talks about her Apple, yeah, baby, yeah.
All 8 bits. All right. So that got weird. Okay.